Da 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 dum dum da 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 da.
Spoiler alert. Hello, Simon.
Hello, John. How's it going?
It's going very well. This is Myths, Mushrooms and Tea, where we talk about myths, possibly as though there are mushrooms influencing them, whilst drinking tea. Although I don't think any of us have tea at the moment, so we haven't really got to a good start. But what are we going to talk about today, Simon?
Well, it's May the 4th.
Well, then may the 4th be with you and happy Star Wars Day.
Yes, thank you very much. How are you a Star Wars fan? Are you a
I
big
am
fan?
a complete nutter when it comes to Star Wars.
Oh,
But
brilliant.
I'd say the first three films, which are films 4, 5, and 6, for those not familiar with the first three films, yeah, absolutely loved them as a kid. It was the first film I ever saw twice at the cinema. Such was its enormity in society at the time. I was just blown away by it. The story was good. Don't get me wrong. Everyone likes a hero's journey, so to speak, which is quite famously about, and we can talk about that more in a minute. But just the effects and the atmosphere and the music and everything. I remember coming home with my friends and we all grabbed cricket stumps and things like that, and pretended they were lightsabers and fought each other. Absolutely marvelous stuff. Just really captured the imagination. Really, really did. What about you? Did you like Star Wars?
Oh, I loved it. So I would class myself as a fan, not a mega fan. And for me, I've just decompartmentalized the Star Wars. So what I've done is 1, 2, and 3 to me is 4, 5, 6, and I just leave it there. I pretend 1, 2, 3 didn't happen, and was it after 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9? I just pretend they didn't happen. For me, that story world just didn't didn't work. I just didn't resonate. I wasn't feeling it. But even now, when I watch, 4, 5, and 6, I just think they're fantastic. They're just he captured the zeitgeist of the time. It was just absolutely. It changed cinema. Once George Lucas brought that out, cinema changed forever because all of a sudden special effects became much more of a sort of focus for filmmakers. They started saying, look at all these lightsabers, and people are really digging all the special effects and the miniatures and the bigatures, where it was able to create the illusion of these giant spaceships and floating around planets. So yeah, obviously off the back of that, then you start getting, do you remember the 80s was full of fantasy films after that?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not sure if Conan the Barbarian came after or before, but it was that was
Probably
the moment.
before. Well, Conan the Barbarian, there's a film we can. I've only watched it once, and it was highly recommended to me as an absolutely, amazing piece of cinema for the time. But I've really struggled with it. Really struggled. Yes.
Oh, that breaks my heart. Conan the Barbarian is one of my favorite fantasy action movies. I love it.
Really?
Absolutely love
What
it.
have I missed about it?
It obviously it's always down to taste, but there's for me it's like an opera because it relies very very heavily on the music. There's the guy who composed it's called Basil. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right. Basil Palladius or something like that. He's a Russian composer, and he just brought out this epic score, and I can sit down and listen to that score all day long. It's amazing, and that score is one of the main characters of the film, and it carries it. So you've got Arnold, whose acting's okay, but he's got so much presence and gravitas, and he just looks so great, and you believe, he's got confidence, so you believe in the barbarian, and then the music carries him. And for me, that movie is just it's just breathtaking. I just absolutely love everything about it. It's very, very mythological, isn't it? There's loads of mythical tropes in there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But is it a hero's journey?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's classic, isn't it? Where you've got somebody who his ordinary world, as far as he understands it, is he's a slave. So he starts off right at the bottom, and he knows that his parents were slaughtered, and he wants to know who killed them. That's his driving passion. And of course, he has to go on a journey of self-exploration. He meets people on the way who teach him and enlighten him. There's a wizard who imparts wisdom. There's a warrior who she teaches him how to love, because he has got no love in his heart because he's pure barbarian. You've got a thief who teaches him, well, how to be a bit naughty and steal gemstones and how to thieve around and so on. But he also allows him to be able to infiltrate the Thulsa Dooms. I love that name, Thulsa Doom. That's played by the brilliant. Funny enough, another Darth Vader link there. Who played Darth Vader? Who did the voice of Darth Vader? James Earl Jones.
Yeah.
So he plays Thulsa Doom, who is the big
Okay.
bad. And so yeah, it's so Joseph Campbell's
Yes, it
hero's
must have
journey.
been post. It must have been post Star Wars because it literally sounds like the
Yes.
Star Wars plot, but
Yeah,
yeah,
very much so. Yeah, I think it was.
essence.
I think it was within a year. I think Star Wars was 1978, if I'm not mistaken, and Conan may have been either the same year or 1979.
Okay, so when we talk about the hero's journey, which you mentioned these two, that was really brought to the public attention by George Lucas, but it isn't a George Lucas thing. It was actually it was an idea written by Joseph Campbell, and so Joseph Campbell, I think, may well have been the president of the American Folklore Society, but certainly was part of sort of the Folklore Society in America. So he had a lot of respect, and he came up with this book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. I've got a copy of it here, and this is quite a well-known book.
Yeah, I mean, so I went to film school, and that was one of the sort of Bible books they said you have to read, like Aristotle's Poetics. And then it was Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. So like these are these have really inspired so much storytelling. So yeah, that's in my sphere. That is one of the main books you have to read.
Yeah. So what's interesting about it is it as a framework for a story, it works really well. But I think Campbell tried to sell this as a key aspect to mythology. And this is how we look at his work differently, with you looking at it from a story writing, filmmaking perspective, and me looking at his work from a mythological perspective. And I think he actually said that all myth is psychologically symbolic, and therefore things shouldn't be taken literally in a myth. They should be taken metaphorically.
Yeah, sounds
and
right.
and it would do to a filmmaker / story writer.
Yeah.
But let me put that into touch in a minute. So from a mythological perspective, anyway. So myths. So people may not understand the difference between myths and folklore and stories you read and fairy tales. Why do we have different names for different stories? And some people think myths have truth in them. You know, there's an element of this is how things really were. Thousands of years ago. But the fact is, myths do have a truth in them, but it's often a sacred truth. It's a belief that some people have. So, for example, in the Near East, in Mesopotamia, 5,000 years ago, people believed in Marduk, and Marduk killed a big serpent called Tiamat, and that's a sacred truth. The people who followed that religion believe that happened because that's how the world then became to be created. But actually, it isn't fact. Truth is not fact. And that's a really important point, certainly in today's society. If someone tells you they're telling you the truth, that doesn't mean they're telling you facts. They're just telling you something they believe. Okay, so always be aware of that if listening to any politicians. If they're not using the word fact, then call them out. But so yes, so myths have sacred truths. Now, what Joseph Campbell suggests he does is he looks at many myths and comes up with this, all these myths have this story. But actually, that is not true. Joseph Campbell was pretty unacademic in his work, where he just picked the stories that met what he wanted to find, and he ignored the rest.
I've heard
So
people
it's like,
say he's a cherry picker to support his
absolutely.
ideas. He would find things that supported it.
And there's nothing wrong with the idea of the storytelling, because as you know, to tell a story, the hero's journey is true, but to say the hero's journey is the root of many stories is a key part of myth. That myths are psychologically symbolic. That just ignores 99% of the myths and stories out there. And so that's really important fact that don't quote Campbell if you want to quote a academic mythological paper, unless you're just trying to disprove him. But
so yeah,
I think
for hero's journey. I think I get the argument, because I've always thought this, when he said this is the monomyth, because he also called it the monomyth, didn't he? The hero's journey. And I always noticed that it was started off from, a person in an ordinary world, who then something shakes the world up, either something infiltrates it or an idea comes across that inspires them, and they have to then go on this journey. They have to leave the ordinary world to go into the great beyond, adventures, trials, tribulations, and the like. And sometimes they will resist it. There will be challenges on the way. They'll meet mentors who educate them. They have to go through transformation. Very often they try to avoid doing it the hardest way. They try to find, the characters very often in the hero's journey try to find it the easiest way, but it just doesn't work. So they have to then take the bull by the horns and go directly for the big bad at the end. There's this death experience where the death of the ego, or a literal death and the resurrection. There's all these little myth themes pop in, and you get to the end where they go back home completely changed, completely transformed, but they go back to the ordinary world. But they themselves may be then the next thing that changes that world, because they've changed so much inside that world itself might change. And that's like a quick overview of it. And I always used to think to myself, well, if that's the monomyth, the one myth, where's all these other elements, like the creation of the universe, which is a huge part of many of the world's myths, and the end of the cosmos, which many world myths end on. And there's loads of other stories in Greek myths which didn't seem to fit within that. So I thought, if that was the monomyth, the one myth, it just didn't quite feel like it was the one myth, which, funnily enough, is why I spent years trying to sort of say, well, is there more to this monomyth? And I've been trying to fill in all these gaps by looking at more mythemes and more stories that might be related to help flesh out his idea. So I think he was onto something. I just think it was limited, and perhaps he needed you and Michael Witzel and other people to help give him more of the comparisons. I mean, that's what I think he probably needed, and maybe he didn't have.
No, he obviously knew they were there. He just chose not to have them. I mean, he would have known the Marduk versus Tiamat myth, as I just mentioned. I mean, that is a myth about gods and monsters. There's no mortal man going away for 3 days and coming back a changed man. None of that at all. It is just here's a monster trying to take over the world. Here's a god that kills the monster and creates a new world. That is not a hero's journey by any stretch of the imagination. So, as I say, he really did, cherry pick is the word you used, the stories to create that. But that doesn't mean that as I say, the hero's journey has no value. It absolutely does in storytelling, but it just isn't a good tool in mythology to use compared to all the stories. It just won't work.
Marduk, his father was Enki and Nema, is that right? The water gods.
There are different flavors of that myth, but yeah, basically Apsu and Tiamat had children who had children who had children, and Marduk eventually pops out at some point. So, and he eventually kills his great grand mother, which is basically the theme of all Near Eastern and Northern Mediterranean creation myths. It even goes into Greece. That's where you get Zeus killing Kronos. That is exactly the same. In fact, it is the same myth.
There must be Campbellian sort of elements there, though, because I'm just thinking of Marduk, and obviously he gets all these accoutrements, doesn't he? He goes off on this adventure, and he's given a net, he's given weapons, he's given halos, he's given the power of the knee. So
power of the wind.
Yeah. So that sounds like very James Bond, doesn't it? When in the beginning of the movie, he's got to go out and do an adventure, and he sees Q, and Q passes these things on, which also I think is inspired by the mythical elements. So you have got elements there, I think, and obviously he's battling a dragon, so he's battling the great big bad. From what I remember when I read the story, he has to fight a whole horde of monsters before he gets to Tiamat. So Tiamat's created an army of monsters, and he has to go through each one. So there's your challenges and trials. He has to hit each one of those on his way, to level up to the next level before he can go for Tiamat. And then when he gets to her, I remember it being quite quick. He just fill her with wind, and then literally just
shoots her heart, because he can shoot an arrow down her throat. That's how the Bible then starts. There we go. So.
Oh wow! But how? I mean, I definitely think there's monomyth elements there of his hero's journey. But what you're saying is there's certain beats missing. It wasn't a full journey, or did you think it was a complete miss? That the Marduk story in no way follows the the Campbellian structure.
I wouldn't say in no way. You can pull out myth themes, I'm sure. So you can pull out elements of a story and match them to a hero's journey story, but that in itself doesn't mean they are related in any way. And I don't think they are, because there's no journey. Marduk has to make, he doesn't have to go to another world and come back refreshed.
Well, it doesn't have to be a literal world, because the world he started in, if I remember rightly, he was less regarded by all the other gods. But when they realized they couldn't defeat Tiamat, and they thought, wow, this goddess is going to level the playing field, kill us all, and we're going to be culled because she's far too powerful. So they went to Marduk and they were like, look, Marduk, if we were to ask you to help us out to battle against this, we would change the world you live in, because the world you live in at the moment is, we haven't got you a very high status, but we will give you, you'll become the king of the gods. We will turn you into a Zeus-like figure. So his status does change. The world he leaves from being, I wouldn't say a lesser god, because obviously they had thought enough of him to say, will you please fight Tiamat, but his status must have just gone up, so that he did come back a different person. He was elevated from, I would say, a minor moderate god to the king of gods. So
for that I'll give you that. Yes. I mean, he was already powerful enough though, and he was also multi-eyed and whatever. So,
but they gave him things to make him even more powerful. So
indeed,
I give you this, you have that. So yeah, it's I guess he was heavily skilled and was multidisciplinary, that he could draw upon all these different weapons. So I think I wouldn't say it's fudging it, but I'd say there's enough there to say there's a journey with heroic. I mean, obviously,
but then all stories have a journey. Otherwise, we wouldn't tell the story.
Well, some
stories, once upon a time, nothing happened at the end, and that doesn't sell many books.
There's when I was studying filmmaking, there was this really interesting story system called Dramatica, and I don't know if it's heavily regarded by lots of writers, but I thought it was incredible. And they actually said there's two story dynamics. You can either go on a journey and you have to change, which is the major one most people go through, or there's one where you remain steadfast. So no matter what happens, you have to stay the same. You must not grow. You must not change. So what the example they gave was High Noon. Do you remember High Noon?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a sheriff of a town. I can't remember who he's played by, but he's a brilliant actor. And he realizes that there's some bandits coming to kill him. They want to get revenge because he put them in prison from before. And they're coming. They could be within the town in an hour by high noon, the name of the movie. And he goes to everybody in the village, in the town, this small town, asking for help. Like, look, I've protected this town. I've helped you all. I've got rid of all the bad guys. You're living in peace because of me. But now retribution is coming my way. Will you help me? And all of them sort of go, "Ooh, I don't know, Sheriff. It's a big worry. It's a big concern. We could put our lives in danger." So he ends up being on his own. He has to defend himself from these bandits who come down. But throughout the whole film, he has to stand by his values. He mustn't change. He mustn't be anything different than who he is. And there's quite a lot of films like that. Not as many as The Hero's Journey, but to stay the same, to be stalwart, to remain steadfast of who you are. So there are stories out there where there is no inner journey of change. It's more of just the strength of the story is be yourself, be who you are, and don't allow yourself to change, which is counter to Campbell. That would be completely counterintuitive to a Campbell movie.
That's interesting. So there's an interesting story that Jordan B. Peterson talks about, which he thinks is the most incredible hero's journey story of them all, which is the Passion of Christ. Yes, I could guess that it was anything else, another subject other than Christ. So he's saying, like, the Passion of Christ, which is basically Christ's last week alive, where he comes back into Jerusalem on a donkey, and people jeer at him or whatever. I mean, but in effect, Jesus has to stand fast and stick to his values, rather than it being necessarily he goes to another world and changes and comes back. So that's quite interesting. But it is I've always found that calling the Passion of Christ a hero's journey suggests that it is a man-made story. And if you think this is the ultimate hero's journey, as Peterson calls it, then it must be man-made. It couldn't have been written down as this actually happened, because no one lives a perfect hero's journey, if that makes sense. No one's life story is that. Otherwise, we wouldn't necessarily find the story exciting.
Hmm. Yeah, but everything Jesus does is. I mean, this it's funny. I study world myth, but I've never gone too heavy into scripture. So I've never gone too heavily into the Bible or the Quran. So it's an area I'm a bit weaker on. But obviously, I've got a grounding because we're all brought up in school listening to the Christian stories.
Mhm.
But yeah, Jesus, he he's definitely that journey he goes on is very much he had yeah he's just almost perfect already, isn't he? What growth does he have to go through? I'd have to study his journey in more detail because I've not put enough work into that. But
Oh, yeah, yeah, he knows he's going to die. He's
yeah,
been, he has foreshadowing that
yeah,
Judas is going to do what Judas does, luckily.
and he
Um,
suffers and he's tempted and there's challenges and
exactly.
trials on his journey. So yeah, it is there. It is
Yeah,
there.
that's quite interesting. I think Peterson said he will write a book about that one day, which would be quite interesting to see. But I'm sure that could then be dissected quite easily
Hmm.
and critiqued. So I'm looking forward to that.
Do,
I'll certainly have something to say about that.
I think the hero's journey very often is based on um, and it's at its oldest sort of manifestation for me was be in tribes where you had to go in a rite of passage, so you had to prepare the boys and the girls for what would come. This is
Hmm.
between the ages of 1 and 5, you protect them, you keep them safe. But when they get to 6, 7, 8, and so on, you start saying, right, there's a tough world out there. We've got lions, bears, and tigers, and we've got other tribes that might want to kill you. We have the landscape, the nature itself. Nature's got cliffs and sharp ravines and dangerous weather conditions that could kill you. So they're so much more vulnerable than we are, and they had to learn to be hard. They had to be hardened up for this world. So the rite of passage was like, we have to put you on a journey, an actual literal journey. So not a story. We're going to send you off into the wilderness, and you have to do, like the Native American Indians would say, you have to go on a vision quest, and you might have to kill an animal and bring back its pelt on your own without any help. You might have to stay 3 days on your own in the wilderness with the skills you've been taught, and they'll send you far away. So a village elder will take you like maybe 3 days walk away, so they know how long it's going to take you to get back. So you can't cheat it. You have to face the hero's journey, and that's why the hero's journey is interesting, because it's not just a story. It's an actual narrative that these tribes built into their rituals and culture to say, we have to help you to transcend your ordinary self to become somebody extraordinary, the best version of yourself. So it's that journey is it's mythic, it's in our stories, but it's also in our history, our culture, our genes are carrying that story from our ancestors to get us to where we are today. They had to survive great hardships, challenges, overcome massive adversity. So it's both a narrative and it's both an actual historical reality as well. So I think that's why myths are so amazing, because they're not just stories. They're carrying something more than that.
That that is a very good analogy. I like what you said there about taking people off and coming back. There's a rite of passage, and that equating to a hero's journey. And I can see that certainly in terms of the berserkers or the wolfish rage of Indo-European warriors. There is a theory that the youth that were taken off for a while, maybe months, and they the stories that they were given a puppy, and
Oh
they had to
God.
look after the puppy, and the puppy became their friend.
Hmm.
And then at the end of the journey, they had to
No.
kill their
No.
dog. Yep.
God.
Um, it's a
Hmm.
that's going to harden anyone up.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
it's going to
Exactly.
make it's awful, absolutely awful, and we do not condone such things. But that's what they did,
Yeah.
in terms of what we see in archaeology and writings and the like. And that is part of a hero's journey. Perhaps that's why I don't know. Maybe it resonates. don't know.
Absolutely. I'm
Is it the
sure of it.
best
I'm sure
kind
of
of
it.
story? I mean, as you say, but there are other stories. There are stories
I
where
think it's so relatable, and it's got, like I said, it's almost in our genes. It's something that in order for our ancestors to get here, they've had to go through. I mean, the story of humanity from 200,000 years ago to today, we know we've gone through bottlenecks, don't we, where we've almost been
Mhm.
destroyed. You know, you've seen our numbers crash down, and we had to come back from that. And I suspect we came back from it because we were so innovative and clever, and so the hero, as we know, can be Odysseus using wit and his wiles, or you could be a Hercules and use strength and passion and endurance, or you could be Achilles and be greatly skilled. But all these different people in the past, they brought their brilliance to bear to get us to where we are today. So that's another thing about the hero's journey. There's so many different kinds of heroes. You've got different archetypes. So you've got the detective, you know, brings their intelligence, and you'd be a great detective, John. You'd be a great detective. You know, the way you break down data and analyze things, and you can see within things. That's your kind of your archetype, if you like. But yeah, the hero's journey is very open to interpretation as well, because there's so many different archetypes. It's like getting a different figure and saying, right, let's play the program of the witch archetype, or the wise elder, or obviously the warrior, and so on. And you can get so many inflections on the hero's journey. So it's a story that you can keep altering. It's got endurance in a way that loads of other stories don't, because for some reason you can keep making the hero's journey. You keep seeing them again and again. Even now they're being made. Like Avatar is still following the hero's journey, and they're still some of the most successful films of all time. Although I've got to be honest with you, it does feel very samey when you watch Avatar 1 and Avatar 2. It just feels like it's a template movie from one to the next.
well,
So
that's what Hollywood has, though, isn't it?
yeah.
Hollywood has a template for movies,
Hmm.
which may well try and analyze a story as though it's a hero's journey
Hmm.
and see how much it links. And that's why we have so many stories like that. In effect, have we, since 1977, got into a habit of only writing hero's journey stories? You know, they're the ones that have become the most popular.
Hmm.
Or is it that the hero's journey story is the beautiful stories? But as I say, how Campbell came to that conclusion is very unacademic.
Hmm.
So I don't know. It's
Well,
an
it's
interesting
an
thought.
academic, maybe because, and this is the thing about different disciplines. I regard Campbell as a little bit of a mystic. His reading of mythology was that he's not just reading stories; he's reading sacred stories. And I believe, you know, he believed in the sacred. He was very Jungian, and he was also very heavily into the Vedanta philosophies and the sort of philosophical schools of the Hindus. And he integrated much of that into his work and his observations. And if you look at some of his later videos, which you can see on YouTube, people ask him, you know, do you believe in an afterlife? And he goes, no, I know there is one. And Carl Jung does the same thing. People asked him, you know, do you believe in an afterlife, or of there's life after death? And he goes, no, I know. I know there is one. I don't have to believe in it. And they both got to that through their learning of and understanding of mythology. And I think for them, it was sacred. It was uncovering something deeper than just a narrative. So I guess what I'm saying is Campbell is working on a different wavelength. He's looking at it through the lens of the sacred, the mystical, the archetypes, the meaning and the purpose behind life and the cosmos at large. So he's sort of channeling all of that into his vision. But then, of course, as you know, that means you can untether yourself and unground yourself from the actual facts and figures and the data of myths. And he may have then used them incorrectly and not used them in the right way, perhaps. But yeah, I think he had a very different take. I mean, do you believe in the sacred story, or do you appreciate them as being stories that were sacred to the people who created them? Or do you yourself think there's something actually sacred about mythology?
And I mean, the myths are just stories about gods and cosmogony. That's how we define myth. If it's got a god in it, then it's probably a myth. If it's got cosmogony in it, the creation of the world or the universe, then it's a myth. But that's it. It has a sacred
Mm.
truth. So people will believe the things that happened in it, even if they're not factually correct. That's what
Yeah,
the sacred is. You know, then
yeah.
so people have that belief in something that no one else has a belief in, because that's what
But do
religion is. Yeah,
do you believe in, because Miss, am I pronouncing his name right? Miss Eliade? Mircea
Mircea
Eliade.
Eliade. Yeah,
Did he? I got the sense that he truly believes in the sacred, and hence why I spent so much time writing this book to try and express it. Did That's probably the only book I can think of that may have given you food for thought about it. But do you believe in the sacred? Do you believe in this mythical stories actually capturing something deeper about the nature of reality and about
no,
having there being a cosmogony and so on?
no, no.
How close did he get to converting you or get you to think about
Zero.
it?
So the unfortunate thing about being a mythologist with a capital M, I guess I'll call myself, um, is that you see all these sacred stories are related, nearly
Mm.
always related. You know, you tell me a sacred story, I can show you where it came from and
Yeah,
another
yeah.
sacred story, and we can keep go back further. So these stories are all man-made; they just cannot be sacred. You know, but what that doesn't mean they don't hold some interesting views. I mean, I really the appeal of the Indo-European cosmogony is fascinating to me, and it is a myth that or an area I specialise in, and I specialised in it before I really realised what the cosmogony was. Before I
Mm.
pieced it all together, or in my opinion, anyway, which is around the balance of the world, and so sacredness. In fact, that's a really interesting point. What sacredness is. So in Indo-European and Near Eastern, sort of pre-Abrahamic religions, the world was balanced. All the stories about the balance of the world, about giving and taking, about sacrifice. Sacrifice is a key part of sacredness. So, if people aren't familiar with it, in Indo-European cosmogony, it's thought that a primordial being that came out of nowhere, luckily, so you got something from nothing, um, gets sacrificed, and the body is used to create the world and all the people on it. Um, and then when people die, that material goes back into the world. And then when new people are born, the material comes from out the world.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes this needs to be replenished. And so sacrifices are made so more people or animals go into the world to help it more people come out. And that's how the balance is had. And the thing about that in these religions is that it is a cyclical event. Every year has a number of events in it that happen, and that happens every year. It's a continual process. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what happened when Abrahamic religions came along is it broke that sacred cycle.
Mm.
So the Bible is a canonical library of stories. So it's very hard to replicate in other religions because they didn't have this canonical sort of thought everything was cyclical. You know, there was no, this is the end and the next thing now continues. It just happens again and again and again. Um, and yeah, even Jesus, you know, he's born, he does what he does, and he dies, but he doesn't come back to do it
Mm.
again and again and again. Even though say, oh, he will come back.
Yeah.
That's perhaps part of the hook, but he doesn't. But with that becoming popular, and Christianity especially becoming popular, it kills that sacred nature of things, that sacred cycle that need to balance the world, because the world is no longer considered cyclical. We lose
That's
the
interesting. That's a good
balance
observation.
of the
I never
season.
thought of that because, obviously the agricultural myths and religions that came, say, 10,000 BC up until the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, they were all very cyclical, weren't they? And all of a sudden, then you get monotheism that sort of downloads into the consciousness and spreads out. And yeah, it must have been monotheism that changed the actual cyclical. I mean, yeah. So you're right. I can't think of a cyclical
So,
kind of story in the
so you
Bible.
could also argue the Renaissance also killed the sacredness because it re-established science and things like that too. And again, and then it gave another bit of push on
Mm.
monotheism and Christianity. But yeah, it's the taking us away from remembering the nature of things and then the cycle of things, I think removed a lot of sacredness from human nature and from our myths.
Have you heard? Do you know Philip Goff? He's a cosmopsychist. So he's putting forward the case for consciousness being something that's fundamental. And he wrote a book just on what you just said, called Galileo's Error. And he was talking about the moment where the story of Galileo sort of changes everything about myth and religion, because up until that point, most people who were scientific and thinking scientifically were trying to understand the mind of God. So for them, it was like, right, we need to understand how has God created all of this. They were all Christians, they were all, all Muslims, deeply interested in understanding the nature of reality. So all of these scientific experiments, the very, very early ones, that's what their goal was. And then Galileo comes along and says, do you know what? I've pretty much figured out that the Earth is not the center of the universe. And of course, all of the theologians were like, what? No, 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 no. How dare you say that? This is blasphemy. And he said, well, I've proved it. And of course, then that got into a lot of trouble because he was going directly against the word of the Bible. And so the lesson we learned from Galileo was that when he brought truth, fact as well, fact, there we go, you've got your facts now. When he brought fact to play, it started to erode the myth, the truth of mythology and the truth of religion. And then obviously Isaac Newton comes along. He's still very spiritual. He's very religious. In fact, he was in a mystical cult, wasn't he? He was a bit of a cult follower. So he was still brandishing the idea that I'm still trying to study the mind of God. It didn't happen straight away after Galileo, but very slowly, century by century, the materialistic empirical machine of science started chipping away to the point where religion was going into recession, and people were thinking, it just doesn't add up, nothing makes sense anymore, science is giving us facts after facts after facts. And so it eroded all of the idea of the sacred. So just recently, there's been a little resurge of the sacred, where there's a bit of pushback now against science, because people like Philip Goff, Annika Harris, Bernardo Kastrup, they're all people who are playing with the idea of consciousness being fundamental. This is the mushroom part of our conversation, by the way, myths, mushrooms, and tea. But the idea is that they said that the one thing science has not been able to explain, and it's had centuries and centuries and decades to understand it, and it's made no progress, zero, and that is consciousness. We have no idea how we are having an inner felt experience of seeing an outside world, smelling the roses outside, hearing the music being played downstairs. All these perceptions that we're experiencing is a whole experience, and you just go through it day to day, thinking I'm just seeing the outside world, I'm hearing it, not realizing that you're seeing a representation, a simulation of what's going on outside, and it's been perfectly reconstructed and simulated as your conscious experience. Does that make sense?
I would question the perfectly reconstructed. It is reconstructed
okay,
as your.
That's fine. Yeah,
it is really important for people to remember. That what we see, taste, and smell is our brain's reconstruction, not what really is out there. Because different animals see the world differently to us in different ways. People
bats are seeing sonic information of radar and so on. Yeah,
exactly. So we have to be careful that actually what we perceive we are seeing isn't really what could be out there. It could look quite different, if that makes sense.
Well, it's easy, isn't it? If you put yourself into the eye of a fly, all of a sudden you're seeing multiple screens. If you put yourself, as you say, into a bat, you're seeing sonar. We know that birds are seeing electromagnetism, so they're seeing things we can't see, and that's what's helping them to
different colours are highlighted and all the like. So
so you're right. We get a human representation, what works for us and what's evolved useful for us to make sense of what's out there. But there's things out there we can't even see that our brains think, it doesn't seem very useful for us, so we won't bother perceiving it. But it's there, But the question. But what we don't know in the world of science is how on earth that experience is being created. So there's nothing that we have explored in neuroscience and the cellular sort of mechanics up until the brain mechanics. There's nothing, not a single iota of information that explains how you are having a conscious experience, an internal felt experience right now as I'm speaking to you, which, as I'm just to reiterate, is a representation, a simulation of what's out there that has been adjusted, adapted, changed, and tweaked, and so on. I don't even know if I'm having the same conscious experience as you. I don't even know if you're seeing red the same way as me or tasting lemonade the same way as me. But we suspect it's similar.
Yes. Yes.
So just to get to the end of the point is that because we don't know, and science is completely just going that we don't even know a way in. We can't even find a way into understanding it. So this is where the panpsychists and the philosophers now are coming in and saying, is it possible then that consciousness isn't being created by the brain, but the brain is in some way extracting it and then representing it, but that consciousness is something deeper, that's more fundamental, that sits below.
So that's the Penrose sort of argument, which is that we've explored the brain so much and we can't find what causes consciousness. Then perhaps it isn't inside the brain.
Consciousness, yes. So he would say, I mean, a way of explaining it would be that you could think of consciousness as a field. So you've got a field of electromagnetism, a field of strong nuclear force. You could the Higgs field. All these different fields penetrate the entire universe. They're everywhere. And the panpsychists are saying just add one extra field, and that field is consciousness. That's all they're doing. They stick it in there. And from their point of view, which is what I'm currently studying, they're saying it helps to make sense of a lot of things, and that's the case they put forward. So going back to Galileo's era, the idea is Galileo kind of came to the conclusion we've got to throw this whole God thing out the window. It's not helping us to understand the nature of reality. And since we've done that, we've made exceptional progress in every way imaginable. I mean, it's truly, religion would not get us to where we are today. It was done by science. It was done by fact-checking, empiricism, and the like. But they are now starting to wonder, did we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Should we have actually not have completely thrown away the idea of the sacred? Is there one thing left that could be sacred, and that would be consciousness?
Yeah. I want to say poppycock. The word poppycock is floating around my head quite a lot at the moment, but I can't necessarily explain why. As I say, sacred is a very particular thing, and I don't think consciousness is sacred. I mean, I think consciousness is just a very low level evolutionary trait that's hidden somewhere in our brains, and one day we will find it in there. We just don't know where it is. And I certainly don't agree that the universe is conscious, or stars are conscious, or planets are conscious. I can understand people look at them and see the ecosystems and see how they respond to other things going on, but they are just, to me, physical responses, not conscious responses. If you put a flame next to someone, they'll move away because they don't want to get burnt. That's a conscious decision. Where a planet doesn't do that. A planet would get burnt.
Theoretically, you don't need a conscious experience for that, because you could remove this inner experience we're having of, one moment to the next, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. You could strip all that out and just treat it like a biological computer. I think some people use the analogy of a robot or a zombie, the idea that you don't have to have an internal felt experience. As long as your body has instincts and it's got electromagnetic processes to pass information around, to warn you away from danger, you don't need this. Why is it there? The whole question is, in a weird way, if you remove consciousness, everything still works, everything still makes sense, and everything doesn't need consciousness to do what it's doing. So why is it there? Why are you and me having this unique inner experience when it's not necessary? Because we can be just robots. We could just be like a computer, a wetware kind of computer, like AI. AI is a silicon-based machine, and we are a carbon-based machine. We're mostly made out of water. Why can't we be like a computer or a zombie? Why do we have to have an internal felt experience? Why can't we just be like them, just running processes and systems and information flow?
It doesn't help us survive.
What's the point? Well, but you wouldn't need. It still would, as long as those processes and laws are set in place.
It doesn't help us. We'd survive better with that, because we have. That's what evolution's about. I mean, when I look at consciousness, where, for example, in 4 billion years, the sun is going to expand, okay? And it's going to swallow up the Earth.
Yes.
Now, if the Earth was conscious, would it not try and do something about it before then? Or when it's happening, would it not try to do something? I mean, if it just stays orbiting the sun and eventually gets swallowed up and burnt up, then what's the point of having consciousness? Apart from
Who says it's not going to do something about it?
Colin, please, Colin.
Let me tell you a
Right.
science fiction story. Right. So
Right.
this is one of my ideas I'm playing with. Imagine I'm going to bring the Earth to life now. Imagine that the Earth needs, first of all, blood. We need blood to nourish everything. So I'm going to give you the water. So whether it's salt water in the sea, or whether it's
That's like literally 0.1% of Earth's material.
yeah,
That's not enough blood to make anything work.
That's
really
true.
bad
But it's
analogy.
it's an
bad
alien
analogy.
being. It's an alien being compared to us. Well, it's not a bad analogy, because metaphorically, when I put it together, it's perfect. If you think about the metaphor, once you realise that, first of all, blood needs to flow throughout the whole body to nourish and so on.
All the way through the centre.
And think of the body of the Earth just as the outer crust. Don't worry about too much about the inner core.
I do worry about the inner core, because that's part of the body of the Earth. That's most of the Earth.
Okay, I will use some of it then. The iron core creates the magnosphere, right? So we've got the magnosphere going around us. Now think of that as skin, the first layer of skin, and that's protecting the planet Earth from the actual damage of the sun, so it doesn't scorch everything and destroy all of the land. So it's got there's a magnosphere giving it a little bit of skin protection. So that would be the epidermis, the highest, the sort of the uppermost layer of your skin. And below that, you've got the dermis, which is a thicker layer of skin, and we'll use the atmosphere for that. So obviously, the Earth developed these tiny little microorganisms, bacteria, and they started creating oxygen. And so, was it the?
I don't think the Earth developed them. I think they came from some.
It evolved mysteriously. We don't know how. It just randomly came.
It came from comets or whatever.
It just random.
Yeah.
But the bacteria, I mean, they may have come, as we know, from volcanic vents underground. But once they got to the surface, they started to do photosynthetic production. They started creating oxygen, and then the atmosphere changed, and then another layer of skin was added. So the dermis is created now. So now we've got the magnosphere as the epidermis, the atmosphere itself, which is creating more protection from the land. And
okay, I struggle because the photosynthesis only happened because the conditions were right for photosynthesis to happen. If photosynthesis wasn't the right way to happen, it wouldn't have happened, and something else would have happened instead. So
yes. So we're trying to. This is the interesting bit is, and I'm always wrestling with this is. And this is one of the hardest things I'm trying to get my mind around, is that I'm trying to get the scientific model in my head as clearly as I can. And then I'm trying to see if you can actually just put consciousness in there. So it's having an internal felt experience. This is a mythological exercise, by the way. And I'm not literally saying this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to bring the Earth to life by saying, let's pretend there's consciousness there and turn it into this organism, this thing that has organs. So yes. We don't know, for instance, why proteins were formed and why those proteins eventually then formed into a single cellular organism. Science doesn't understand that. We don't know why. It's a mystery. So panpsychists will say consciousness. They'll say the Earth itself has some kind of conscious, agency to, in some shape or form, develop that as an intuitive sort of, this is a need, just like you wouldn't be so aware of your brain constantly at the moment regulating your blood sugar, your temperature, the balance of white cells to red cells and so on, but it's constantly making those adjustments every day. It's an unconscious kind of thing. So I would present this to you as an unconscious kind of, not an intelligent conscious being thinking it. I would play it much like the ganglion of the brain, the lizard brain. It's just running basic systems. So if it were a living organism, it would be basic level lizard brain kind of sort of unconscious working. Don't worry too much about that anyway. Let me bring this thing to life. So you've got your skin. The water, then we need to transfer it around the body. So we need arteries to take it to the organs and the muscles, and then we need veins to take them back. So I will give you transportation and evaporation, where the water from the seas rises into the sky, is transported to the land, rains down, nourishes the land, much like the muscles get nourished. And then, of course, the rivers return it back to the heart again, which would be the oceans. So you've got this cardiovascular cycle. You've got a circulatory cycle. Are you with me so far?
Well, you're talking metaphors, yes. So
yes,
I
metaphors,
but
metaphors.
Nothing here seems like consciousness, and the metaphors are a stretch. But carry on.
But I would argue we need to rethink our relationship to metaphors, because I think one of the biggest problems we've made today is we think of metaphors, as I think you're thinking of it, as poetry. I think we see metaphors as creative imagination, making relationships between two seemingly unrelated things, and then creating something quite beautiful and meaningful, but just, just flourish, just a garnish of life. But it's just poetry, right?
You
I'll
create
put it to you.
analogies rather than metaphors. It's an analogy. So,
Yeah,
precipitation to two rivers to the
yeah, yeah.
sea is like
The analogy. I
your
go with that.
sweat turning into the blood and the bloodstream going to the heart, which it doesn't quite work for me. But yeah, I get it. I
So
get you give me analogies, and I get that.
yes,
It's like
analogies,
the
metaphors,
earth.
imagery, symbols,
It's
and the
like
like.
the physical earth can be said in an analogy to represent a living organism.
Yes.
In terms of its physical traits.
Yeah, and it adjusts, and over huge, vast epochs of time, as it might get illnesses, and getting struck by a meteor causing heating up, and it starts to have a, what would you call that when you get hot? I've been doing it in the last couple of days when you're running a fever,
Yeah.
and then the body has to develop some antibodies. It's like, how can I resist this kind of damage again, making me really ill? And the antibodies would then be like, well, I need to create cells in my body that are a bit more intelligent, and then mammals come along, and then eventually apes, and then these apes sort of go, oh, we can create all these amazing things. And you can think of it as a immune response to the things that have happened, mass extinction events over, well, 4 billion years of the Earth's history. So it's a very strange way of thinking, I know, and I'm doing this agnostically. So when I always enjoy doing this with you, because I know as an atheist it sounds like madness, but as an agnostic I'm open enough to be able to play with these things. But I know that it could fall flat if I can't ground it in something real and scientific and so on. But I do think there is an argument to be made that the Earth is a living system. James Lovelock was my hero for this, because he puts forward the idea of all the different organs, like the ventricles of the heart would be the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean, constantly creating cycles of and flow of blood
Yes, we
around
have
the body.
ecological systems. We get that.
Yeah.
But and to say you can create an analogy to a living organism. I'm struggling with the consciousness.
So the consciousness would be, if it is doing that, and this is a big what if, but if the Earth is able to respond to things that happen to it in an unconscious way, but you read those unconscious, I don't know whether to say decisions or consequences, but if it's responded by, so just to get back to what I was on track, because I think this will be better explained if I get to the end of the story. So if it's got skin, and it's got blood, and it's got arteries and veins, and lungs would be the forest and the jungle, so you can breathe as well. So it's breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen, which we then use. You can give it the mountains, just like in the world myths, would be the bones. The mountains would be the thing that hold it together. The tectonic plates are the hips, the joints, because it moves around. So you can kind of bring it to life and make it seem, using metaphor and analogy, you can make it seem alive. But that's the emphasis on the word seem. You can say this is just poetic flourishment. But I don't think it is. I think the analogy and the metaphor is revealing something, and I think our ancestors read those metaphors and read the analogies. They drew relationships and patterns between nature, animals, weather conditions, cycles, and mountains. Hence why they came up with that story of the cosmic man we were talking about earlier on, who sacrifices himself so that he can create the cosmos. The idea, they were saying, they could see in that story that the planet was a living system, and that it was in some way like a sleeping giant, that it was in a sense that it killed itself. It was unconscious, if you like. It was no longer consciously having agency, but its body formed all these different parts. For them, I think they were picking up on metaphors and analogies that I actually think could be real. So have you heard that saying about mathematics? Is mathematics discovered, or is it created, invented? Have you heard that argument?
Yes.
I will put it to you: are metaphors created, or are they discovered? So in other words, are there actual living metaphors that exist in nature and the cosmos at large, on scale, by the way, so even as low down as the atomic world, building up to the stellar to the human culture, at all these levels, are there metaphors and analogies that link them together that exist in nature itself, separate to a human seeing it in the first place? It just exists in nature. I'll pose a couple to you now, but do you think they're created or discovered?
I think they're created. I don't. I sort of don't quite. I can't comprehend the question, because then I don't see that relationship. I mean, physics has created the laws by which things are, and because all things follow those laws, there will be similarities between how some of these things work at different scales. So I don't, so they are there, but to actually say, oh, this looks like that, someone has to sort of imagine that.
Yeah,
But
I think you create you. I give an example. One I really enjoy. I've told you this one before. If you think of evolution has a story, and we start everything, all life starts off mysteriously as that single cell, a little tiny cell with a nucleus, with a membrane around it and tiny little organelles. And that was, we don't know how it was created. We don't know the impetus behind what created that, but that was the first living system that we know of that evolved, oh gosh, was it nearly 4 billion years ago? So from that little cell, it goes on then to eventually create a cluster of cells called a multicellular organism, which hasn't got a brain. It's a bunch of single cells living together, cooperating and creating a symbiotic relationship. They then eventually evolve into something which resembles a flatworm. And that flatworm is the first creature we know to have a brain. It has a tiny little ganglion, tiniest little brain you can think of. And that gets switched on. And that organism might be tens of thousands or a million times larger than a single cell. So it's now on scale, it's being reproduced. That then goes on to evolves into a fish with gills. The fish with gills goes on to evolve into an amphibian that goes onto the land. So we're now going on and off the land and the water and so on. And they've got webbed feet and toes. That then evolves into a lizard. And that then eventually splits off into either the dinosaurs or the mammals. There's a split there. We obviously followed the mammalian one. And that story of life to where we are today, we know that they eventually became apes, then eventually turned into us. Where it gets interesting is when you look at pregnancy, when you study the development of the fetus in the womb, you see a living analogy, one that exists. It's just that nature's done it. So you've got the first moment, you've got the ovum, the tiny little single cell, which we all begin as, and then it gets the sperm comes along, impregnates it, and then life starts from there. That's brand new life's created. It starts off as a single cell. It becomes a multi-cluster of cells in a couple of days. It then turns into, and I'll show you a picture of this. It looks like a flatworm on the ovum. That then evolves into what looks like almost like it looks a bit fish-like. This tiny little, I don't know whether it's a zygote at this stage, but it's got gills. It's got gills. We all have these gills, and then it seals over. Then it moves on to the amphibian stage, where you start getting webbed fingers and toes appearing at about 10 weeks or 8 weeks, somewhere around about there. So you're seeing the reflection of evolution within the womb of the mother. And one way of putting that... Go on.
No, are you seeing a reflection of evolution, or are we seeing patterns that remind us of a reflection of evolution?
Well, I would say it's so uncanny to see the evolution of life mirrored in and you can see the images, and it's why doesn't, for instance, we've got so many different kinds of species. You've got fungus. There's no stage where we look like a fungus necessarily, and you've got stages of dinosaurs. That's not reflected in there. It specifically seems to be our journey, the human journey to where we got today, the single cell to the amphibian, which we all know is what we used to be when we came out of the water. That journey seems to be reflected. I would argue that's I'm going to use the word living metaphor only to explain what I'm saying, is that it's like life says, this happened over 4 billion years to get to where you are today. And every time you have a child, I have to go through that process. The way I built you as a human is I had to start off as a single cell, and then I had to become a multi-cell, then I had to become a flatworm, then a fish, then an amphibian, then a lizard, then an ape, or sorry, say a rodent, and then an ape, and then the human. And it's reflected in the mother's womb through pregnancy. I would argue that's something in nature is recreating that story to create the human, but you see what appears to be a living metaphor, one that doesn't exist. It's not created by the mind. It's actually reflected in the nature itself. I got a few more if you want to chuck some more at you, but that one's a big one.
But I think that's, yes, I mean, I know exactly what you mean, and I'm familiar with some of the images, and we'll put some up for those who are watching the podcast. And then there's one to say that the embryo looks like an elephant embryo as well. Our embryo, but we never was an elephant.
I've never heard of that one, and that's great. If it undermines the argument, I'll
I think it's just, watching a single cell grow into a fully grown human. It will have a number of stages that you could say visually look like other creatures, but that doesn't mean that they are. So, the amphibian stage, we wouldn't be cold-blooded. We'd still be warm-blooded. Right. You can't breathe underwater. Well, actually, too. Well, you could argue that.
I think we are breathing underwater, aren't we?
Yes, the liquid there, but you're via a tube. In effect, you're not breathing underwater. You've got a tube.
And go on.
Yeah, I'll just say it's visually we'd like to say, we can see the metaphors or analogies or whatever you want to call them. I just, it is just the nature of things, of how they grow. I mean, I'd like to see the fetus in every other animal and see if it does the same.
Yeah, depending on which animal you choose. I mean, I've seen
chicken. There's a chicken turning into a dinosaur, for example.
I'd love to see it, whether it gets the sort of like it's worth looking into. Yeah,
that's your homework.
Yeah. I'm up for it.
Look like a dinosaur.
and a fungal one. Yeah. It'd be very interesting. But that what interested me was when I heard somebody say, "Is mathematics discovered, or is it invented?" That changes. Either one of those will change your entire understanding of reality, because if you were to say it's invented, then you consider humans to be the apex of brilliant minds that are able to invent mathematics and then gets to the stars, whereas other people are saying it's already there. It's almost like these platonic solids, like the universe is already made out of these mathematical sort of systems that underlie what we, going back to what you said, what we can see and what we can't see. So we know we can't see the electromagnetic rays, we can't see certain types of radiation, but they're there. What's to say that mathematics itself is a form of information that flows through the cosmos, which is by the way, a credible scientific theory? And if that's the case, and it's encoded into the nature of reality, we can't see it, but it's there. What's to say that these metaphors as well aren't something that exist in nature and reveal themselves at certain points to people like myth makers and poets? And they whereas a scientist tells us how the universe is constructed and the way in which it evolves, it's the poets and the myth makers who go, there's meaning here. Look at the meaning between this and that. There's something connecting them. And that then I would say for them, they would say gods and goddesses, the gods must have created this and the god must have created that. But I would argue, could it be consciousness? Could it be some kind of underlying consciousness, which is, in the first place, like I said, where did the single cell come from? What got it to that point to become that? What was leading that?
Okay. Pi.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. There is a number with an infinite number of decimal places that look non-repeating to us, certainly after many billion of places. We do not see any patterns. A consciousness wouldn't have created that. It's just impossible to create an infinite thing in consciousness, because it would take.
What if consciousness were infinite? If it were infinite,
then we wouldn't be here, because we've never reached this point in time.
But that's the whole point of the story of the Big Bang, isn't it? That something that is infinite destroys itself to become, to literally fragment itself and turn itself into
no.
tiny
If it
little
was
things.
infinite, we would never have a Big Bang, though. because you'd never get to the point where you could have the Big
I know
Bang.
some people who'd argue saying that there never was one.
Yes,
I can think of quite a few people say
it
that.
wasn't. It wasn't quite a bang, definitely not. But
It was more like an unfurling, I think, was the big
yes,
unfurling.
possibly yes. But
Yeah.
as I say, there couldn't have been an infinite amount of time before that. Otherwise, we'd never got to that point in time.
Well, some people would argue we're living in infinity right now when we've never left it, and that every moment we're in is infinite, and that there's no, have I ever talked to you about block time, about the way block time, the way I think Einstein explained time in a block of time there, the beginning, say the beginning of somebody's life, the middle of somebody's life, and the end of somebody's life. Look at it as a block rather than as a linear sort of process, and that block exists. Imagine that block as being one thing. So it's not separated. It's one thing, that entire life in one span. And Einstein said that when you die, I'm trying to get myself about the camera here. When you die, that block doesn't disappear. It exists in the past, and it's still there now. And as it exists in the past as a block, it's still present with us. So I think he was trying to explain to somebody who'd lost a loved one that they're not necessarily dead. And he was trying to explain it in a scientific way, but with meaning. He was trying to say they're not dead and gone. They're still here. They just exist in the past, but they exist. Their existence is not gone completely. It's just right now you're not experiencing it. And he was then trying to say, and block time is everywhere. All of time can be looked upon as a block. It's just one thing. So the infinite is always there. Even when you think you're in something separate, you're still living in something infinite. So the thing is, maybe your analogy doesn't quite work. Maybe infinity is right now where we are. Everything is infinite.
Well, infinity is a mathematical concept. I don't think it's a real concept, or we couldn't be here. And I'd also worry about block time. I would agree in terms of visual information. Absolutely, it exists. But in terms of material information, I would disagree. In the sense that if you could travel faster than light, and you could travel for, let's say, faster than light, twice the speed of light for an hour from now away, and then point a telescope back at Earth, you could see us starting this podcast.
Yeah.
but you wouldn't hear us. You couldn't interact with us. It's just visual information. So, because if it was anything other than that block, you'd also have to have that energy with it, which means that the universe would need to create an infinite amount of energy every second, sort of thing, to store all the things it's doing. And every time it stores something, it then has to store all that plus something else. And it just couldn't do that. So I'm not.
Why couldn't it do that? I don't understand the why.
Well, there isn't an infinite supply of energy.
There's 0 point energy. Infinite.
There isn't. There cannot be an infinite amount of energy.
I'm sure there's so 0 point energy, if I'm not mistaken, in the fabric of space-time. That there's some scientists who believe that there's 0 point energy, that there's just infinite energy you can tap and just pull out of space-time itself.
That's very convenient for them, but I don't think that is the case, because that energy would have to disperse in other ways too, such as, let's say, gravity. And the universe would, if it has an infinite amount of energy, would have an infinite amount of gravity and an infinite amount of heat and an infinite amount of light, probably. And we don't see that. That's just not the case.
Yeah. You're stretching me to the point now I'm starting to sort of like tumble off of my knowledge base. I'm
okay. But yeah, no, that's good. That's fine. But yeah, I say it's I like having these conversations and to see where others think things are. And yeah, perhaps there's scientific arguments amongst what that you're not familiar with, and I'm certainly not familiar with. That may help justify some of those points. But certainly, from my understanding, I believe in ecosystems and physics, and if you drop something, it will fall to the ground on the Earth. And if you drop it in space, it will just stay there and float.
I still believe in those things as well. I mean, it doesn't. Nothing.
I don't believe there's any sort of consciousness in it. It's it is all just cause and effect.
Yes. So that takes us to a systematized understanding of the cosmos, where there are processes set in place. There's a guy called Stephen Wolfram who's he's created a sort of system to try and understand how patterns are created and how everything came from nothing, and the way things evolve and grow. And he's using computation to do it.
Yes.
And he believes the universe is ultimately computational. It's a computer. And that it's there's nothing more, no life. It's just inbuilt to the mechanics. I don't know what his views are on where that all came from, and I think he's actually trying to find a way of doing it without it coming from nothing. And maybe he's thinking of it cyclically. I'm not sure. But he's a materialist, and he's very much I don't think he believes in anything like consciousness being fundamental. But he has had some very interesting conversations with a guy called Bernardo Kastrup, who is an idealist, because I think Bernardo Kastrup was trying to say what you're presenting is actually supporting my idea of the universe being conscious. And Wolfram was going, bollocks, no way. I don't want you to associate me with that at all. But then he put forward such a good case. No, it was Donald Hoffman, who does simulation theory. So they got together and did I recommend it. We can put it in the link below. It's a really good podcast to watch because they debate their ideas. It's basically Wolfram would be your ground. You'd be with Wolfram.
I know
and then you
Wolfram
get to see,
very well, yeah.
Yeah. And then you get to see Bernard, what did I say his name was again?
Hoffman.
Hoffman. So it's a fantastic debate because they in many ways when I think of computation, when I think of Wolfram's computational work, I think of us as computational. I think we're all, your DNA has the 4 letters. I don't know what they are. Is it A, D, E, K or something? Or am I making that up?
You made up the K, definitely. I think it's like A, B, D, G or something.
Yeah. So we're computing information. Information is flowing through us. We are computational biological wetware machines. So when Wolfram says it's computational, I think we're computational. But then I also think, but I feel alive. I feel conscious. So if the universe is computational, could it also be experiencing some kind of internal felt experience of what it's like to be the cosmos, the universe, without, and this is where the bit I'd like to assert, without being intelligent, without having the power to create good and evil, without being able to manipulate your world and your experience, none of that. I'm just saying it en masse has an internal felt experience. But Carl Sagan said something very interesting. He said, you are the way for the universe to know itself, which is a brilliant statement because it's you, John, Simon, and all the people out there are a way for the universe to know itself. And remember, this is Carl Sagan, the eminent, brilliant physicist and scientist. And he wasn't saying it, he didn't say it spiritually. He wasn't saying it with a spiritual connotation. He was saying it practically. You are the way for the cosmos to know itself, right? You evolved from the cosmos. You now understand the nature of the cosmos because as scientists, you've understood it and you've comprehended it, and you're sharing it amongst all the other humans to know the nature of the cosmos. So that's kind of where I think he was getting at. You are the way for the cosmos to know itself. But I would argue, and this is a bit of another theory to go down, but I would argue that if we are connected to consciousness, and consciousness is something that is fundamental everywhere, then I would say that there is some kind of spiritual dimension. I use the word consciousness because I don't like using the word spiritual, but there's like some kind of spiritual essence just underlying the whole thing, that when I think of the universe as a computational machine, and I think of myself as a biological machine, and I sense that I'm alive, I sense I have spirit, vitality, consciousness, I think, well, then can we then take that one step further? It's like the opposite of Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins said, I'm going to get rid of, we used to believe in Zeus, we used to believe in all these other gods. But when you become a monotheist, you believe in just one. And he says, I just go one further. I just do shop, that God, and I'm where I am. What I'm saying to the scientific world is you've given me consciousness. I'm a machine. We know that cells are conscious. They're machines. Can't we just take it a step down to atoms and a step up to the cosmos itself and just say it's everywhere?
Well, yeah, that's jumping from life to non-life, which is a big step.
Yes, it is. Yes, but I mean, to be fair, who would have thought a cell was having a conscious experience? That in itself is mind-bending.
Well, not everybody does, Simon.
That's very true. You'd have to be undercut. You have to be following the work of Mike Levin to understand that one.
Okay, so we seem to have sort of taken a wander from Campbell and his hero's journey. So let's try and go back there, Simon. So how does all this relate to with the hero's journey and
Right.
Campbell's view of sacredness and myth and alike?
So I guess Joseph Campbell was seeing patterns, and he was seeing universal patterns that repeat in culture, in tribes, the animal kingdom. This sort of the going on a journey. Life and death is itself basically the encapsulates that entire journey. What you go through, there's the hardships of survival, and you die, and so on. It's all there. So I think he was just saying that it's etched into the cosmos itself. That the cosmos is a metaphorical, symbolic system, and you can look at it through the lens of science, and you can look at it through the lens of philosophy, but through the lens of mythology, you're reading it more with analogy, metaphor, symbolism, imagery. And I think mythologists, or myth makers rather, they were seeing these patterns and creating meaning, and that meaning then created narrative, and that narrative created epic myths. So I think that's where I think Campbell was coming from.
Okay.
Less of an academic, more of a mystic.
So let's send this on a question then, Simon. If the universe is conscious,
Yes.
is it on a hero's journey?
Yes.
And if it
Absolutely.
is, where are we? And please give me some good news.
What act are we on?
I would say, are we just beginning, or are we in the other world?
I've actually mapped out a myth for the 21st century, and now you've asked that question, I can tell you where I've placed where we are now, and it's this would be Act 3, the final act. That's where I would place this. So Act 1 would be.
So we've left the other world and going back into the natural world. Is that Act 3 or is Act 3?
Act 3, the final. We're looking towards the final showdown, really, when you get to Act 3.
Cool.
But it's quite, Act 3 is could be quite big. It can be quite a lot to Act 3. You've got usually you've gone through a death experience and you come out the other side, and you're now the true hero that's going to take on the battle, the antagonist, the big bad. So that's you've kind of like gone through a death, and you're resurrecting again. And I would say, yeah, we seem to be going through quite a lot of turmoil. Like, I think culture and the globe at large is going to change so significantly in the next 5 years. I think the old ways are going. It's just we're just seeing the collapse of old empires and new cultures emerging, and old conflicts still battling it on head on. We seem. I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. It does feel like we're living in almost like a mythical time. It just, when you think about the Hesiod's sort of 4 eras of man, the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, and then the Kala Yugas and the different Yuga systems. They very often mention the collapse of a civilization and the beginning of a new one. And it just feels very mythological at the moment, the way things are going.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, because it's like in the last 100 years, that's when everything we sort of know in today has been created. So we've only lost 100 years, and 100 years out of man's life is nothing.
Well, this could be the last 100 years could be the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age. That could be what this represents, and we're coming to the end of it, and then we move on to the next. I mean that very, very poetically, not literally.
Yeah, so it's interesting that, but yeah, I think, as I say, for story-wise, the hero's journey is fantastic. To me, though, as a tool in mythology, I feel it lacks the academic rigor.
It needs an update. Do you think his work could be perfected and updated so it would be more credible?
What you mean? Yeah, that's what the mythology database is. So that's
But somebody would have to write. Somebody would have to rewrite the hero's journey with an understanding of the new insights from the mythology.
Or what is the question you need to ask to understand it? So I could literally ask a question of the corpus of data we have on mythology and say, if you average all this out, what is the average myth? Is that really what we want?
No, it's not. No, I don't think it would work like that. I think it would show you. I think the way I'd see it is you'd have to get the prehistoric ones first and sort of see the way they interpreted things. Then you'd get the agricultural ones, or the shamanic ones. Maybe you get more of the shamanic sort of ones, and then see if that adds a couple of extra layers and chapters. Then you'd get the agricultural ones, and that might add some extra bits to the end. I think rather than blending it, you're sort of inserting chapters and extra
You're
acts
seeing
and so on.
how these stories were built up and evolved.
Yeah.
They got
Yeah, I wouldn't merge it into one story. I think you'd be looking at that. And then yes, once it's all put together, you'd be able to run a line through that would be a kind of a merged amalgamation, but it would resonate with all of them to some degree if it was done properly. I'm going to give it a go.
Yes, well, we've got the data and we've got the compute, so yes, that's something we could do. And we'll find out and we'll give you the results whenever that program finishes. I mean, it sounds a bit like Deep Thought from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah,
we have a question for you.
Oh, there was one thing I didn't mention, which was it's just a crazy idea, but I love it. Which is when I was bringing those organs to life, I was going to say, you said, how can the Earth avoid the sun? And I'm going to give you a scientific story of how it might, a sci-fi story of how it could happen, but not one that might not be beyond the realms of possibility, which is if the planet Earth was a living system and there was a consciousness element to it, and it did evolve lungs and a heart and blood and so on. My argument that I'm putting forward is that it's still evolving, it's still growing, and you've got to think of the Earth in a completely different way to us. It's much larger than us. So if you think about, say, a tiny little fly, and when you try to swat it, you can't quite hit it because it flies away so quick. It's got a time dilation, it experiences it differently. Yeah. Think of the Earth like a tree. It's very slow. So in my eyes, it's a baby. It's still a baby. And it's just about to be born. And that birth will be artificial intelligence, or AGI rather. And that brain will be the last organ where it sort of clicks into place and goes, there we go. I've just been born. And once it's born, it then has more agency, more control, more power, more resources. It'll start going out and gathering asteroids and different elements and drawing energy from the sun. And eventually it might say, in about, I don't know, I can't remember how many years. Is it 1 billion years or 800 million?
3.5 billion.
Yeah, when the sun goes. Who knows what kind of technology that AGI will have ascended to, where it actually will be able to move with the supernova of the sun and just maybe move itself away. Or maybe it'll say, I'm done, but I'm gonna create a whole vessel, stick all of life on it like Noah's Ark, and send it out to make sure it doesn't happen. But there we are. That's my crazy idea. That would be how the Earth escapes. So you were asking if it's conscious, how can it do it? Well, I'm saying it's not fully conscious yet. But it will find a way. Life finds a way, as they say.
I'm not convinced. My view would be it's all for one and one for all. I think it's how it doesn't go that way. Yes, it's but yeah, interesting little chat there. So that is the first episode of Myths, Mushrooms, and Tea.
Very much,
everyone.
Yeah.
It's these are the sort of things we talk about, different ideas, and take them wherever they take us, which has been a really incredible journey today.
Yes, we went on a hero's journey there, John. It's funny, you did say we're going to start with May the 4th be with you, when we ended up with Conan the Barbarian and Living Planets and yes, Campbell. I would say his works are in today's perspective is flawed. So I would agree with you. It needs to be updated. That's where you come in, John.
Oh, I've got far too busy for that. Thank you, Simon.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes, we'll catch up with you all very soon.
Yeah, may the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you, indeed.
Catch you again, John. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
long and prosper.